The MacBook Air is arguably one of Apple's best-selling Mac, and for good reason too. It's competitively priced, it's super portable, and it delivers exceptional battery life and performance that frankly has left most PC alternatives behind. But every now and then, something special comes along the way, and that can certainly challenge what the Air brings to the table. And I think I've found one. It's this, the new Dell XPS 14. Now, I have to be completely transparent with you guys. I was absolutely thrilled when Dell announced a complete refresh for the XPS lineup. They finally brought back the XPS brand back to life instead of sticking with their confusing Dell Pro Max. Yeah, it was a mess. So the new XPS 14, it's thinner than its predecessor. It sports a completely new, fresh design. It comes equipped with Intel's new Panther Lake CPUs. So I thought it would be interesting to put this up against the MacBook Air because Apple just recently refreshed their lineup with the M5 chip, and while the hardware is identical to the M4 version, the question that I'm hoping to answer with this video is pretty simple. Has the PC side finally caught up with the efficiency, the performance, and the build quality that Apple brings to the table? Now, before I get into that, I need to discuss the pricing situation. Unfortunately, Windows laptops in 2026 are expected to be significantly more expensive compared to last year. And most of that is, well, it's due to the increased demand for RAM. Meanwhile, Apple has somehow managed to somewhat remain immune to this trend. I mean, sure, the new M5 MacBook Air is $100 more than the previous generation, bringing it to $1,099 US. But you're getting twice the storage instead of 256 gigabytes while still retaining 16 gigabytes of memory. This is the 15-inch model that I have over here that costs around $1,300 for the base spec. Keep in mind that it comes with the 10-core GPU as opposed to the 8-core GPU found in the smaller 13-inch base MacBook Air. The XPS 14 on the other hand starts at $1,600 US, but as of making this video, Dell has already discounted it to $1,350, and the spec that I have over here costs around $1,450, which gets you the Ultra 7 355 versus the Ultra 5 325. Honestly, the only real difference between these chips is a 200 megahertz clock speed bump, but everything else is pretty similar to the Mac, including the 16 gigabytes of memory and half terabyte storage setup. So with that out of the way, let's get into the design and build quality differences between these laptops. And honestly, they're both nearly identical in this department. We're all aware of Apple's track record with the build quality. It's always top tier. The design language has remained consistent since the M2 generation. And I mean, why mess with a formula that works, right? The XPS, on the other hand, has always been the closest, in my opinion, to delivering that Apple-like feel. But this XPS 14 goes above and beyond. So the entire chassis is made out of CNC machined aluminum, and it feels awesome in the hand. You still get that cold feel when you pick it up first thing in the morning. It's very much close to what the Air brings to the table. Unibody construction, refined internal structures, and you also get the XPS logo on the front. It's sleek, and I guess from a distance, it kind of looks like the Space Black MacBook Pro. The hinge is smaller, and Dell has engineered a really clever weight balancing mechanism that lets you open the laptop with just one hand. And it has a magnetic lip around the edges, so you still get that satisfying click when you close the laptop. Although I did notice that the top lid doesn't align with the bottom deck. I'm not sure if this is due to the new design for the hinge, but it does look like the lid is about to pop off. And in terms of portability, the XPS 14 is slightly thicker at 0.6 inches, while the MacBook Air comes in at 0.45 inches. So it's roughly 30% thinner. However, the XPS 14 weighs less than the Air. The 13-inch Air, on the other hand, is lighter than the XPS 14 since it is natural. Obviously, it's a smaller footprint. The XPS is 3.05 pounds or 1.38 kilos. The Air is 3.3 pounds or 1.5 kilos. Interestingly, the OLED offering on the XPS 14 shaves some weight, bringing it to 3 pounds, and they've also surprisingly managed to make it thinner at 0.58 inches. Now, when you choose to go with a laptop that has a super thin profile, you're naturally going to make some trade-offs, and one of them is in the I/O department. The Air, it only gets you 2 Thunderbolt 4 Type-C ports, a headphone jack, and a MagSafe port for charging. MagSafe, in my opinion, is seriously underrated. And while it being proprietary to Apple, it doesn't take up a USB port while charging, unlike the XPS, because Dell offers 3 Thunderbolt 4 ports, which sounds great on paper, but one of them is most likely going to be occupied with that power cable, leaving you with 2 usable ports. Then again, with the crazy battery life this thing offers, you might not need to keep it plugged in as much as you'd think, because this is where things get really interesting. The XPS 14 comes with a unique high-density 70 watt-hour battery, while the MacBook Air has a slightly smaller 66.5 watt-hour battery. So for light web browsing in Chrome, the MacBook Air lasted for around 14.5 hours, while the XPS pushed an incredible 43 hours. Yes, you heard that right, my friends. That's almost 2 days of continuous use. This is where that variable refresh rate display plays a vital role. It's honestly one of the most impressive results I've ever seen, or the entire team here has seen on a Windows laptop, period. On our 4K YouTube playback test, the Air lasted for around the same 14 hours of use, while the XPS, it managed a little over 20 hours. Again, that is absolutely insane from a 14-inch laptop. Now for gaming, the MacBook Air lasted a little over 4 hours, while the XPS ran out of power just under 3 hours. The included charger on the MacBook Air is super portable friendly. I mean, it's a 40-watt USB-C adapter, and it comes paired with a really nice braided cable that's color matched to the device. That said, I did wish if the cable was a bit longer, especially when you're in situations where you're far away from an outlet, like a classroom setting or cafe. That's where it becomes a challenge. The XPS has you covered though, since the cable is significantly longer and the power brick is pretty compact, though it's not as compact as the Air, but the overall package is still fairly lightweight and it'll easily go into your backpack. You won't feel like you're actually carrying a brick. Moving on to the interior space, starting with the keyboard. And Apple has pretty much retained the same formula across the MacBooks. Whether you choose to go with the 13-inch Air or the 15-inch Air or the 14-inch MacBook Pro or the 16-inch MacBook Pro, it's pretty much identical. It's very sleek with the insanely fast Touch ID sensor that seamlessly works with Apple Pay. So if I'm making online purchases, it just adds that extra layer of security, which I do appreciate. The keys offer good feedback while maintaining a satisfying amount of travel, and the LED backlighting is bright and fully adjustable through the OS. I wouldn't say it's the best keyboard on a laptop, but for note-taking and general use, this thing gets the job done. The XPS 14, on the other hand, well, it has a pretty different setup. So Dell calls it their zero lattice keyboard with no spacing between the keys, and visually it looks awesome. It looks incredible. It's super sleek and minimal, but actually using it feels a bit off. Because the keys are so closely packed together, I found myself constantly making typos. Maybe I need a little bit more time to get used to this new layout because I'm used to laptops with more of a traditional setup where there's a little bit of spacing around the keys. So this one certainly felt foreign to me. The feedback is decent, though the travel feels even shorter than the Airs, which makes keystrokes feel less tactile and numb. And you only get one brightness level for the illuminated keyboard, and the brightness is dimmer compared to the Air, which is a bit disappointing. Now, both these laptops feature haptic trackpads, but Dell has designed theirs a bit differently by creating a seamless glass surface throughout the entire palm rest area with etched borders to indicate where the trackpad ends. It's, again, a really clean look. I think they're trying to go for that sleek, minimalistic aesthetic here, and I'd appreciate that. I'd say it's arguably one of the best haptic integrations I've seen on a Windows laptop so far. But that said, the left and right clicks feel a bit uneven, almost as if you have to apply more pressure on one side versus the other. It just feels like sometimes, you know, I'm lacking that fine-tuned, granular feedback that you get with each click, like the Mac does. It still does an excellent job with palm rejection. The Mac is overall a beautiful experience. I've never really had any issues with palm rejection or any cursor skipping issues. The left and right clicks just feel right. It's perfectly balanced and responsive. I also noticed that the edges on both the MacBook Air and the XPS 14 are super sharp, and I will guarantee you that you're gonna end up with some wrist marks one way or another, depending on the way how you type on these laptops. Moving on to the displays, I mean, look, in a nutshell, these are essentially the same type of screens, just offered in different toppings. Both use IPS panels, but the MacBook Air comes with a slightly higher resolution at 2.8K versus Full HD Plus on the XPS. There's still plenty of screen real estate to work with. Personally, I'm a sucker for bigger screens, and so I tend to favor the 15-inch Air. But that said, Dell does offer the XPS a 16-inch form factor if you want a bigger screen with high resolution, but they are charging you close to $2,000 for that. On the color front, both panels are excellent. The MacBook Air has better color gamut compared to the XPS, covering 99% DCI-P3. The brightness levels are identical. It's pretty much neck to neck between these laptops, coming in around 529 nits of peak SDR performance. The XPS has anti-glare coating, which significantly cuts down on reflections compared to the glossy screen on the MacBook Air. The contrast ratios are better on the XPS, and the white point is more representative for standard photography, video, and web content. The Air, according to my calibrator, measured at 6,900K versus 6,600K on the XPS. So the whites look cooler on the MacBook Air versus that neutral look that you get on the XPS. They've implemented their very first variable refresh rate display ranging from 1 Hz to 120 Hz. They actually spent quite a bit of time developing this panel, and the idea is pretty clever, right? I mean, depending on the type of content you're viewing, say you're just reading an article, for example, the refresh rate drops down to 1 Hz. This was the major turning point for Dell to deliver some of the best battery life results we've ever seen on a laptop. The problem though, and I'm not sure if this is tied down to my specific unit over here, is that when I'm scrolling through Google Documents, the text, it sort of fades away during scrolling and it comes back to its original opacity once I stop. It's kind of distracting when I'm working through long documents. I tried it with dynamic refresh rate both on and off, and it was pretty much the same either way. The MacBook Air M5, which remember is only a 60 Hz display, didn't have any of those issues. The text looked pretty consistent the whole time while I was scrolling. And because these are LED IPS panels, there's no PWM flicker, which is a big plus in my opinion. Dell does offer an OLED option as an upgrade if you're looking for a better eye candy experience, but it is going to be dimmer than the IPS option on the base spec. Plus, I don't know if you knew about this, but it actually consumes more power, resulting in lower battery life. So if you're looking for better battery life, IPS is still the way to go. This is what the webcam looks like on the MacBook Air M5. Apple is using a 12 megapixel center stage camera, and the field of view is really wide. This is arguably the widest that I've seen on a laptop webcam, and the quality is incredible. I mean, it's sharp, the microphone sounds awesome. Let me know what you guys think. Let's hop on the XPS 14. And this is what it looks like. Dell is using an 8 megapixel sensor, so the detail is really sharp, although there is a bit of processing happening, but it is better than some of the other Windows laptops that I've taken a look within this category. Probably the best, I would say, because it handles the highlights really, really well. And this is what the microphone sounds like. Let me know which one you think looks and sounds better. The built-in speakers on the XPS 14 fire upward through the keyboard. While the MacBook Air uses a 6-speaker sound system, it's actually tucked right between the hinge and the display. And surprisingly, the XPS has more power and output compared to the Mac at max volume. Bass response is superb on both laptops. The Mac was a little bit more clear on the trebles, whereas the XPS sounded a bit muffled in the highs, partly because the speakers are hiding underneath the keyboard. But honestly, these things are very close to each other in my opinion. Now, if we look at upgradability, no question here. The MacBook Air does not give the ability to upgrade anything, including storage. So what you configure at checkout is pretty much what you're stuck with for the rest of its lifespan. The XPS, on the other hand, offers a bit more flexibility, though getting inside isn't exactly straightforward. First, you need to remove the 4 Torx T5 screws and then use the tip of a plastic scribe to carefully dislodge the palm rest assembly. You gotta be extra careful about that MCU cable while doing this. Once you get in, you'll find a single M.2 SSD that's user replaceable. The drive speeds on both the MacBook Air and the XPS 14 are very strong. In fact, other than a chip refresh from M4 to M5, Apple also implemented a faster storage drive. So both read and write performance have pretty much doubled compared to the previous generation. But that said, the XPS 14 does have the faster drive. So I guess that sets us a stage for arguably the most exciting part about this comparison: performance. Now, I ran these laptops through our usual suite of benchmarks, but I did run something a little bit different, which I'll get to shortly. But just to see how these things stack up, I'm going to start with Cinebench just to establish a baseline. The M5 Air is absolutely incredible. It crushes the XPS 14 in single core. It's a whopping 68% ahead of the Ultra 7355. Multi-core performance tells a similar story. The M5 is about 30% faster. Keep in mind, the XPS is running at 29 watts, while the MacBook Air is sipping around 15 watts, which makes Apple's efficiency advantage even more impressive. For real-world multi-core tasks, the MacBook Air, again, it continues to dominate in Adobe Lightroom. The M5 Air is about 58% faster. Handbrake transcoding, it finishes about 20% faster than the Ultra 7355 on the XPS. The performance in Blender shows an even bigger gap where the M5 Air is about 40% faster than the 8-core CPU on the XPS. When we shift to GPU accelerated workloads, the gap widens even further. This is honestly quite disappointing from Intel. You do have the option to upgrade to the Ultra X7 with a better GPU, but again, that is going to cost you significantly more money. For content creation, I tested both DaVinci Resolve Studio and Adobe Premiere Pro with a 4K timeline. And in both applications, the MacBook Air M5, it just walks all over the XPS 14. Look, I'm not going to sit here and say either of these laptops are geared towards serious content creators who need a well-oiled machine that can handle everything you throw at it. But these days, it's hard not to recommend the Air for anyone thinking about getting into the creative side of things. It's just so good. Apple has done an incredible job with optimizing the M series chips with both Blackmagic and the Adobe ecosystem, along with some other third-party applications. And it really shows in these results. All right, so I want to do something a little bit different with this comparison. Right now I have Chrome running with multiple tabs open. And as you can see, the Mac, it kind of handles everything pretty smoothly. I can scroll no problem. The XPS kind of takes some time to catch up. If I'm scrolling through the site, there's a significant amount of delay. If I go into this Volvo page over here, it's an overview of the Volvo XC90. You can see that the video preview is pretty smooth on the MacBook Air versus the XPS 14. It's just kind of choppy. It's struggling to actually play that back in real time. If I look at memory consumption, the XPS is consuming roughly 10 gigabytes, whereas the Mac is consuming around 60%. So roughly the same, but the Mac is actually a lot more efficient and it's handling everything very well. Now, this next test involves opening a bunch of documents. This consists of PowerPoint files, Excel files, Word documents, and some local video files that I have exported. In total, it's about 16 gigabytes. On the Mac, all I have to do is just select all the files and then hit on open, and it just opens pretty instantaneously. It's very fast. On Windows, for some reason, I can't do it all at once. I have to like go back and kind of click and open all these things all at once. You can see that it is pretty fast. Another Word document. So the Mac feels snappier, while the XPS, it takes a couple of seconds to load up. But if I just go into the bird's eye view and just open up, let's say this PowerPoint application, yeah, it loads up no problem. All the thumbnails are loading up properly. And if I look at memory consumption one more time, we're sitting at roughly 84% memory consumption on the XPS, while the Mac is consuming around 70%. Now, while I have all these apps open in the background, I'm going to open up Adobe Lightroom just to see how fast it takes to launch the application. So I have Lightroom pinned over here to the taskbar. And as you can see, the Mac is pretty fast, but let's just see how fast it's going to take to import all the photos. We're going to click on import here. These are 100 photos, and you can see the operation progress over here. The MacBook Air is pretty much done, while the XPS is not even halfway through. All right, I'm not done yet because I want to open DaVinci Resolve as my last application for this test, just to see if the Air can even handle it. So let's just go ahead and launch Resolve, load the project. We're still waiting here. You can actually still hear the fans on the XPS 14. I don't know if you noticed, but the XPS 14 is plugged in and it's set to the ultra performance setting, whereas the MacBook Air is on battery. And this thing is just, it's just going. So let's just go into the playback option over here, and I'm just gonna scrub through the timeline. Everything seems very fast and fluid. All right, so we're playing back video right now. The XPS is oddly a little bit choppy. It's catching up, but the Mac is actually doing a pretty good job so far. It's pretty smooth. It's pretty consistent at 30 frames per second. If I just jump into another part of the timeline, let's just see. Mac is pretty instantaneous, guys. I mean, that's just a no-brainer. That's crazy. Like, this is already here. Like, it's halfway through. We're already way into the timeline, and the XPS is just, I think it's pretty much frozen. I don't think I can do anything at this point. So performance and efficiency clearly favors Apple, but there's one major flaw with the MacBook Air. It's passively cooled. there are no fans, which sounds great on paper, right? I mean, you don't have to worry about fan noise, unlike the XPS 14, which is actively cooled, and you do start to hear those fans spin up when you're putting it through its paces. But the problem comes when you hit the M5 with sustained multi-core workloads. The CPU's power levels just fall off a cliff. It starts around 25 watts for instant bursts, but over time, you can actually see in this 15-minute Blender run, the CPU power levels average to around 8 watts, with performance cores running well under 2 gigahertz. That's a significant drop. Now, that got me thinking. There's got to be a better way to manage heat. And while there are thermal pad mods out there, I was on the hunt to find a cooling solution that could adapt to different form factors, so I could really test whether each laptop's cooling systems is capable enough for its own hardware. Enter the Razer Laptop Cooling Pad. This thing offers both passive cooling by elevating the laptop for better airflow and active cooling with adjustable fan speeds. It's compatible with laptops ranging from 14 inches to 18 inches, and it comes with different magnetic frames to fit various sizes of laptops and different types. There's even a specific frame designed for fanless laptops like the MacBook Air. It also features smart cooling that adjusts fan speeds based on CPU and GPU temperatures, which is especially useful for gaming laptops. Keep in mind that you do need to have Razer Synapse installed. If you're interested in checking this thing out, you can find the links down in the description below. Now, this setup is a bit unconventional for portable use. You do need to power it separately. It takes up an extra USB port to power the expansion ports at the back. There's a power button on the side, which is very easy to get to, and a quick fan speed setting, like I mentioned earlier, that toggles between low, medium, and high. And it comes with Razer's signature chroma lighting as well. So you can adjust those lighting effects with a press of a button. So with the cooling pad paired to the MacBook Air, I set the fan speed to the low setting, and the results were pretty interesting. We went from averaging around 8 watts in our Blender run to 15 watts, while the performance cores were operating to close to 3 gigahertz. That certainly helps improve performance, especially in multi-core focused apps like Blender and Handbrake. I mean, the extra 20 to 40 seconds shaved might sound minimal, but over time that actually does add up. The XPS 14 also gets a nice boost with Razer's laptop cooling pad. Okay, what about gaming? Well, I don't want this to become a Mac versus PC debate. I ran Cyberpunk 2077 at 1200p on medium settings just to see how these GPUs, integrated GPUs, stack up. The M5 Air averaged around 49 frames per second, while the XPS 14 came to around 37 frames per second. So the 10-core GPU on the M5 is pretty capable, and it actually pulls ahead here. Neither of these laptops are really geared towards gaming, but if you want to play something like Dota 2 or anything lighter that has support for both Mac and PC, they're playable. So has Windows laptops finally caught up with the efficiency, the performance, the build quality that Apple brings to the table, specifically in the sub $1,500 category? Well, yes and no. You see, the XPS 14 it's genuinely impressive. The build quality, it's fantastic. It feels premium. It looks gorgeous. The CNC aluminum construction, it just rivals what, literally rivals what Apple has been doing for years. The battery life, especially for web browsing tasks or something lighter, is absolutely bonkers, thanks to that variable refresh rate. We're talking 43 hours of web browsing. That's just, it's game changing. From a design standpoint, Dell has really nailed it with the refresh of the XPS line. I mean, sure, there's some trade-offs with the zero lattice keyboard and the haptic trackpad that still needs a little bit of refinement. But when it comes to raw performance and efficiency, the MacBook Air M5 is still in a league of its own. It's significantly faster in single-core tasks, multi-core workloads. Again, it just walks all over the place with the XPS. Same thing with GPU-accelerated applications and creator-focused apps, all while consuming nearly half the power of the XPS 14. Sure, it is passively cooled, but it still does an incredible job on the performance front. I think Dell is in the right direction. I'm excited to see where they take the XPS line even further with their future products. Let me know what you guys think. It is an interesting year. It is going to be an interesting year with the new stuff from Apple, but also the PC side, it still has a little bit of catching up to do, and also a lot of these OEM manufacturers have to start pricing these things competitively against what Apple has to offer, because, it feels like from a value standpoint, the MacBook Air is just really hard to beat.